All right, everyone. So in that great segue at the end of Felipe's presentation, he mentioned that sometimes we need to add qualitative approaches to understand our data, even when it's collected in some of these larger scraping methods. But today, I'm going to go even beyond that. And I'm going to look at some of the ways that we might collect data qualitatively and also analyze data qualitatively. So I'm going to start with a refresh of what is online antisocial behavior and then why you might want to study it qualitatively, because as we know, we don't always get the same representative samples or the big data that we would get in some other approaches. And as Felipe mentioned, it becomes very expensive, if not impossible, to analyze all of the data that you might scrape qualitatively. So why do we do this stuff? And I'm going to provide some example methods of data collection. I'm going to look at some particular types of data collection that are, I think, quite good for studying online antisocial behavior. And then, of course, some unique ethical considerations to this type of research. So, very quickly, what are we looking at when we look at online antisocial behavior? It's a range of things, right? Trolling, harassment, bullying, cyber stalking, deepfakes, doxing, disinformation campaigns, technology-facilitated violence, online abuse, and hacking with the intent to cause disruption, right? So this is such a broad group of different behaviors, brought together under this banner of online antisocial behavior that it's, we can't, one method does not fit all, as we have seen. Why do we want to study this stuff qualitatively? Well, first of all, there's a lack of agreed upon definitions, right? So what does it mean to have antisocial behavior? Some people will say, and as we've noted in previous presentations, that, oh, no, that tweet was just a joke, like it wasn't harassment. Whereas somebody else will say, that tweet was absolutely harassment and I'm feeling very upset by it. So this is something that if you're doing a survey or scraping data, you can't always discern without that kind of qualitative study. As mentioned, there's an appreciation of context or nuance, right? So that toxicity analysis was amazing, but it can't tell us whether somebody is using a sexual slur to describe Justin Trudeau, whether they're calling Justin Trudeau an idiot or various other things. So what is actually the context of that toxicity, even once you have scraped data and used some of these great tools? And then, of course, there's the opportunity to uncover new avenues for quantitative exploration. So qualitative studies can be done as sort of exploratory research to then get the points that you want to drill down on a big survey, for example. So what's an example, right? So this is something that George Falatsianos and I did earlier a couple of years ago. So we asked people why they might engage with COVID-19 related information to find out a little bit more about the misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic. So by engage with, we asked people, whether they would like, share, comment, etc. So people told us that they generally don't engage with COVID-19 information on social media. So that's cool. If we had put that question on a survey, we would have then said, do you like, share, comment on COVID-19 information? And people might have said no. But then we were interviewing people and we used an elicitation interview, which I will talk about. And we asked participants to bring an example of COVID-19 related information that they had recently engaged with online. And then we asked people why they engaged with it. So then instead of getting maybe that yes, no answer, suddenly we saw, oh yeah, here's a Guardian article that I saw online. Or here's a post that my friend made. And when we had simply asked them, or if we had simply asked them in a survey whether they had engaged with it, they might not have remembered. But by asking them to bring in that prompt, they could tell us a lot about it. And they also told us that they engaged with this or shared it online or otherwise commented mostly when other people in their network they felt needed to see this information. And they told us more information because we had open-ended, so semi-structured interviews. They told us more information that suggested that they pictured an audience in their head. They imagined an audience of people who were kind of like them. And so then by extrapolating, oh, what would I want to see? Or what would I need to see about this on social media? They extrapolated that to their audience. And then that's what made them decide whether or not to share it with others. So what we could not have known prior to the study is this idea of the imagined audience. And I don't think I would have known to put a question on a survey about, well, how are you thinking about your audience? And then how do you get that response in like a scale, right? It's very hard. But now that we know that they do this, we could see designing a survey in which you could ask maybe a question like that. So I'm going to give you some qualitative methods that I have used or am using or have thought about using to study online antisocial behavior. Now, this is not a complete list, right? There's so many, but I thought these are ones that are particularly good for this topic. So firstly, elicitation interviews, and I briefly touched on this. So elicitation interviews are when you ask people to bring you something. Sometimes it's, like in my case, we asked them to bring something that they had seen on social media. In other cases, you could be asking people maybe to draw or bring something that is special to them, depending on what you're doing. The context of online antisocial behavior, it probably is, well, bring an example of a post that made you feel threatened or harassed online, or give me an example of a post maybe you saw somebody else doing that kind of behavior online. And then let's talk about it. And we design our interview questions to really drill down on what people are showing us. Now, benefits is it offers additional and different data than you would get, in a survey or scraping some of this data. Yes, we could scrape a bunch of data from Twitter and we could see how toxic it is, but we don't know how an individual maybe responded to that or felt about it. And when they bring it in, we can drill down and get that additional context. You can use semi-structured interviews or unstructured interviews. You can get people to tell you stories and get additional context-rich data there, which are sometimes things you could not have predicted. It provides a form of naturalistic observation, and by that I mean you are engaging with people and their social media content. So one type of elicitation could be to sit down with people as they scroll through a site like Twitter, for example, and get their impressions of that too, and that's when it becomes really naturalistic. It allows for specific questions targeted to the individual, and importantly, for the topic that we're studying, it can empower your participants, right? So suddenly you're asking people to tell them a bit more about themselves and their experience in their own words, and they get to choose what they're going to show you. And I think that's really important when we're studying a field where people are feeling very vulnerable and are made vulnerable. Now, of course, the challenges, and this first challenge you're going to see a lot, it's not really generalizable, and you can't get a representative sample of thousands of people doing this way because it takes time. It takes at least 60 to 90 minutes per person. Now, of course, the data is going to be very rich and very complex, and that can make it difficult to interpret, or some people would say, it's sort of open to your subjectivity there. And that's why it's really important to do a lot of checks back with your participants. It requires you to be co-present with the participants, so that's not necessarily means that you have to sit in the same room, but it does mean that your participant actually has to feel comfortable, for example, sharing a screen with you. And depending on the group that you are talking to, they may or may not feel comfortable doing that. And then, of course, great care must be taken to anonymize your data. You can't, take a really horrible message targeted at somebody on Facebook and then reproduce it in an academic paper, right? That would not be, obviously, a good idea. So next, I'd like to talk about diary study, and that is when you ping participants at various points throughout their day or their week, and you ask them a question. Oh, what are you looking at on social media right now? Write me back. Or you can get apps that allow them to upload a video and send it back to you. For studying online antisocial behavior, a great way to engage in a diary study might be to get people to send you a note or ping you when they encounter distressing stuff online, right? So that you could conceivably design a study where the participants are checking in and letting you know what they saw and how they felt at any given time. Now, again, this is a naturalistic observation type study. You are engaging with what participants are seeing with in real time. It's great because it'll give you multiple snapshots over a longer period of time. So unlike the first elicitation, where maybe they bring you one or two things, diary study, they're getting asked several times over the course of a day or a week to send stuff to you. And so you can get those multiple snapshots and see what they have in common. This can help you identify trends, and it can be nicely paired with an interview or even elicitation interviews. Now, this asks a lot of your participants, so you have to be prepared to compensate them, and it often requires multiple and frequent prompts from you because people forget to send you that diary when they run into the content online. it does rely on your participants not forgetting to provide you those updates, or some system to make sure you're reminding them. And there are technologies that allow you to do this more seamlessly, but they can be expensive. Now, anecdote circles is one that we are beginning to explore. And anecdote circles are basically a type of focus group, but where focus groups usually provide people's opinions on a subject, anecdote circles are meant to provide feelings and are meant to provide experiences. So they're more phenomenological. People sit around and they will tell you an anecdote, right? Tell you a story about how this happened. And again, good for antisocial behavior, especially for people who are targets, because they can sit down and they can tell you about what that felt like and what they were doing at the time and really relay that information to you. And doing it in a group allows people to remind each other. So somebody might say something, the next person will go, oh yeah, that reminds me of a time where something similar happened to me. And unlike individual interviews where you can't always, again, as the researcher, know how to prompt people, the benefit of having people together in a group means that they can jog each other's memories. We build off one another. This, again, is another method that can be combined well. Like maybe you start with a diary study and then bring people together for an anecdote circle. The presence of other participants might also help your participants feel comfortable. So unlike, again, the one-on-one interview, which can feel a little bit like you're grilling somebody, it can be more casual. And people, once one person opens up, if you have that one outgoing person in the group, other people are encouraged to do so. Now, just like other focus groups, though, you have to watch out for a few things. Groupthink, for example, or a really empowered presenter who monopolizes the conversation in the whole room. And for that, it takes a lot of skill in active moderation. And that skill can be built over time, but you don't want to just, send a research assistant in cold to go lead your anecdote circle. Now, of course, it's time consuming again in the data collection and the analysis, because you'll get transcripts of a group of, say 6 to 8 people, and you can times that by the number of groups you have. That can be a lot of data. And importantly for your participants, it's never 100% anonymous, because everybody in the focus group sees who else is there. So there's a level of trust there. You have to, feel okay, and everybody in the room has to know that they're going to be able to be identified by those other people, but you usually get people to sign like a non-disclosure agreement for that sort of thing. And then you want to be intentional too about your choice of participants, right? Because you don't want to get maybe a perpetrator of online antisocial behavior in a group with targets of online antisocial behavior. That might not be a comfortable space for your participants to engage. All right, and there's ethnography, which is doing ethnographic research while on the internet. So it includes participant observation, it includes sometimes document analysis, it includes interviews, and all of these things are brought together to paint a complete picture. Now, the great thing about ethnography is it's very well used, and it combines different qualitative methods, sometimes even quantitative methods. That participant observation piece adds an additional dimension to the data analysis. So you become then one of the participants, and you get to add your own reflexivity, if done well, to the research. Now this is also good because it literally meets participants where they are. You are going into spaces and online communities where people are, and you are engaging with them. Now, there's ethical challenges with that. So if I go into an online community, what are the ethics around if I don't want to disclose that I'm a researcher, or I feel I can't disclose that I'm a researcher doing research? And can I do it? Should I disclose, right? And those are key issues, especially in this field, that could impact your research. So if I go into a subreddit that is based around some Trudeau must go trolley behavior, I probably don't want to disclose that I'm a researcher. But if I don't disclose, can I actually ethically do the research? And that is something that we all need to come to terms with our own research ethics boards. And normally the standard is to absolutely disclose, but we can all think of cases where we might need to figure out how we can do this. It's also difficult to maintain researcher distance, of course, if you are actively participating in a community. So then you need to negotiate, what is my perspective and point of view? How am I bringing it to the table? And you have to be really explicit about that when you write up your results. And of course, ethnography creates a large amount of data. and could be risky for you as a researcher if you're going into communities that are, a little bit antisocial themselves. Now, with all of the data that we might have collected in these other methods, there is, of course, you need to analyze it. And I think no analysis would be complete without at least some qualitative text or image analysis. So again, looking at the examples provided by Felipe, we might want to know, for example, what kind of insults are being leveled with the hashtag Trudeau must go. We might want to classify those insults, group them, or theme them to find out, well, are there certain groups of people, maybe coming from, a certain background that are mainly focused on calling Trudeau an idiot? Or are there groups of people that are mainly focused on grouping Trudeau with the other left-wing political parties? And why might we need to know that? Maybe we want to find out what the trends are, whether examples repeated look like coordinated bot behavior, or all of those things. Maybe we want to see what images are used and what symbols people use to try and encourage other people. We might want to determine why a message is so persuasive. And there are limits to what automated textual analysis can do. So you would pick a subset of a big data set like that. And you would get a group of people together and start to theme them. And you could either create your themes ahead of time and then look in your data to try and see how they align with the themes you've created, or you can do completely open coding in which you have multiple passes at the data and you're looking to see what things seem to go together each pass that you go. Of course, for that, you need multiple coders so you can validate and make sure that people are choosing similar categories or at least on the same page. So, benefits and challenges. The benefit of doing qualitative text and image analysis is that you can then get some of these rich data sets that you've collected in other ways and do more with them, right? These pairs well with other methods described, including quantitative analysis. It allows you to get that additional context that you need. When you're doing something like measuring toxicity, it also allows you to validate those sorts of things. And it doesn't expose participants to any additional risk than they have already entered into by being on the social network that they're on. Now, of course, sampling can be a key challenge because if I have 1 million tweets or even 300,000 tweets, how do I decide what the best sample is, right? To be able to do the qualitative analysis part. And often it's random sampling, but there may be reasons to not do random sampling. Of course, reproducibility, if you are doing open coding and you are really coding for something that is not reducible to a strict content analysis, you might not have something that is easily reproducible by another researcher. So you have to think of what are you able to provide then that gives that context so somebody coming along after you will see where you were coming from and where you got that analysis from. Of course, just going to the text doesn't really give you any insight into the motivation of the person who posted or the impact of their post. For that, you really need to go to talk to people. And you have to make an effort always to anonymize your data, even when you are coming from a site like Twitter. Somebody could type that tweet into a Google search and find it, and maybe that person didn't really consent to being involved in your research. So you really want to take the pains to anonymize data so that you can ensure that nobody can be, back searched in that way. Now, I wouldn't be at Royal Roads if I didn't mention arts-based research. Now, arts-based research can be a type of elicitation where you actually get people to come in and create artwork. So it could be a poem, could be a play, could be a painting. It creates artwork that really starts to open them up to maybe some of the feelings, accessing some of the feelings that they might have had, but maybe don't have words for right away. So it can be really good to apply to, say, maybe targets of online antisocial behavior, because maybe they, come into an interview with you and they really want to participate, but they're still having some feelings that they haven't quite managed to process yet. You can, sit them down either in person or virtually on Zoom, and you could just ask them, just draw, like, how did that make you feel? Or write me a poem. How did that make you feel? And then you use that piece of art to elicit, greater feedback, and you can get into a deeper conversation. So It again pairs well with elicitation, interviews, or anecdote circles. It can be fun for your participants, and it's always nice to plan research where your participants are enjoying being a part of it. For some vulnerable populations or people who may struggle with language difficulties, this can help participants articulate their feelings or articulate them in a different way, and it taps into a different part of people's brains. So they're not being so analytical, and that might allow you to get at some more of the emotional stuff if you're looking to understand that side of things. Now, of course, the farther you get from the logical stuff, the more difficult it is to analyze and interpret, right? So there's, again, subjectivity there, probably multiple check-ins with your participants. It takes extra time and resources like many of the others. Not easy to do virtually. You can have somebody draw and then hold up their picture to Zoom, right? But if somebody's not, a Photoshop artist, they might not be drawing online. And arts-based methods still are not always well understood in the broader research community. So, you will find that there's only selected journals that might publish this work. Now, of course, going one step further, it's important to consider how we can empower our participants, particularly if they are targets of online antisocial behavior, and what we might do to put them in a place where, even though they're talking about something that does make them very vulnerable, that they are taking some ownership in that. And so participatory research is often a good way of bringing your participants into the fold and making a safe space for them to tell you about what's important to them. So participatory research could be checking in with your research participants from time to time to ask them about the direction of the research. So you are putting them in a role of being able to tell you what they would like to see from the research, maybe what methods they would like to use, or what research goals are important to them. And you can involve them as much or as little as you like. So, it could be that you're checking in with a group of people who will do elicitation interviews every so often to see what their priorities are. Or it could be that once a month you're getting around a table with everybody who is doing this now research with you, and your research participants have become team researchers. That is, of course, very difficult to do and extend over a period of time, but that is the most empowering way, is to have them involved frequently, often, and in many different research decisions. Now, the benefits of course, is they're empowering your participants. Your participants can tell you what methods they want to use, but the sky's the limit. You could use a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods. And it's an ideal way to work with marginalized population because it flies in the face of the traditional research model where a researcher sort of parachutes in, does the research, and leaves. But there's a loss of control for you as a researcher, and there could be inconsistent contributions from participants over time. Sometimes the enthusiasm wears off, and it's harder and harder to get people to come to the table. Care must be taken with the process, so how do you resolve disputes if you have them? How are you going to compensate your participants, et cetera? And of course, like some other group methods, it might be difficult to anonymize your participants if they are in a room together. But then again, they can also decide how much they want to be anonymized. They might want to be co-authors on your next paper, and so that's kind of cool too. A type of community or participatory research that is of particular interest is community-based. So this is when you go into a community with the intention of making change. So it could be maybe you're working with a ministry in the government who has found that they want to work towards creating a new system so that the ministers don't get harassed so much online. Well, you would work with them to do a research project with the intention that you're going to implement whatever you have found out in your findings as a recommendation. And so this is a really great way to conduct participatory research because it can increase your research impact. Again, you're empowering your participants, and you have this community there ready to go, so you don't have to worry so much about the recruitment of the data or the application of your research at the end, because you're working with the community on that. And again, this can be used with a variety of other methods. Now, community-based research, it's growing in popularity, but it's still not always taken seriously depending on the journal that you want to publish in. And it places competing demands on your participants. Are they there for the most rigorous research, or are they there for their end goal? And so balancing those demands, not impossible, and I think it's worth it, but it is a consideration. Then, of course, also difficult to anonymize. So on top of all of these things, of course, there are some ethical considerations which are particular to qualitatively engaging with people, asking them interview questions, sitting with them, etc. And that is, you are asking people sometimes to relive these traumas that they've gone through. So if you're talking about some of the more extreme forms of online harassment and you want people to tell you about it, that's a lot to ask of them. So you need to be prepared to support people. Of course, we've talked about participating in groups and the challenges there. Now, reporting back participant data also needs to be very carefully considered. So particularly, when participants have, again, told you things that are very traumatic for them, you probably want to check with those participants, giving them a copy of their transcript so that they can verify and they can tell you, actually, no, like I don't want this part to go in the paper at the end because it makes me feel very raw. And then, of course, compensation and representation. How are you representing people and how are you compensating them for it? And I like to add, what do we owe to each other? So really thinking of, as citizens and human beings, if you are asking people to share sometimes these very traumatic ideas with you, how do you take care of them? And I think we always have to lead with that, and probably for any research, but especially for this. So, in conclusion, qualitative methods rule. They can be mixed and remixed and combined with the quantitative, combined with each other. It gives you some really great context, some very rich data, which then, if you want, you can design ways of finding out if the data is representative. But ethical concerns can be heightened with many of these methods, and it's just important to be aware and make sure that you are adequately supporting your participants. So I guess we have time for a few questions, but I know I'm in the way of your lunch, so if people just want to run and eat lunch, that's cool too.
So we have 2 questions from the chat room. Both are from Chuck's. And Chuck's asking, how do we ensure the rigor of doing qualitative research? Question number 1. And question number 2, which method do you recommend when studying student lived experiences and related issues?
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll start with the first one. Yeah, I mean, rigor is really important, and rigor looks different in qualitative than it does in quantitative. So again, we're not looking for a representative sample, and we're not looking necessarily for something that can be generalizable. So how we make sure that our data can stand up is you want to use as much of the data from your participants as you can, which is why we go back to the participants and get those checks, and provide, if a participant tells you something in an entire paragraph, you want to provide as much of that paragraph as possible, right? So that other researchers can read what your participants told you and then read your analysis of what they told you and, see why you analyzed it in that way. So you really have to provide a lot more of that raw data in the paper. It does mean that a lot of times that qualitative papers can be quite a bit longer than a similar paper that was done only with quantitative data. And the second question was?
Students' lived experiences. How would you study? Which method would you recommend?
Students' lived experiences.
I'm assuming related to the antisocial behavior.
Related to antisocial. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are various ways I might tackle that one. I might use the anecdote circles and bring students together in different sort of focus groups to tell me about their lived experiences being online and what they have seen online. I might choose to use diary study, where we're pinging students repeatedly, throughout the day, and or reminding them at the end of each day, can you talk about, something weird that you saw online today? Or elicitation interviews probably would be the third. I would probably go with one of the other 2 first, but to have them come and show me what they've experienced online and tell me about it.
Yelena asks if you could share your experience recruiting participants for interviews focus groups on such a sensitive topics as this one, your experience.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's a really great question. Because we have found in the past, so we have used Twitter, for example, as a recruitment tool where we put out a call for participants on social media because the subject includes social media. And we found that people can be very eager to come and talk about these things because, they're on the sites all the time and they're experiencing this stuff and they're just like, man, I want to tell somebody, but I want somebody to do something about it. But the downside of recruiting that way is you're really limited to the networks that you are connected to. And we found that it was sometimes difficult to get people with backgrounds significantly different from ours. So people from, unique cultural groups, people from the, trans community, for example. It was hard to get quite a few people from those marginalized demographics, and you really want to reach those people. So we find now that it's better to use sometimes participatory methods and sometimes other methods where you target different communities to find people directly rather than growing broadly on social media because it limits the different people who respond to your call.
So we exhausted the questions from the chat room for now, but because it was such an interesting presentation, let's cut into lunch for 3 minutes and maybe open the floor for questions from the room. And Wiki will be moderating the session.
I'm next to the mic, so I think it's on, yeah? Okay. Hi, thank you so much to both of you for these presentations. I love the balance between quantitative and qualitative. So my question kind of treads that line between both presentations. I was really struck in Felipe's presentation with two of the tweets that were marked as toxic. One which was, "Why don't you eat?" And the other was, it was something like, "Why don't you biodigest your own fluids?" or something like that, which could, for anyone with a knowledge of colloquial English slang and offensive words, could be, basically reduced to the first expression, right? But so it struck me that it almost looked like it had been written with the intent of expressing the same sentiment message, but getting past the censors, or maybe that it had been run through some kind of automatic translator or something. Anyway, these are things I'm thinking about. So, but obviously it was marked as toxic because of, word patterns or phrasing patterns and stuff like that. And I'm sure a number of other reasons. But so I'm wondering, in terms of, doing qualitative analysis, which is more my background, what are you looking for in these kinds of tweets? Are you looking more for content? I know that one tweet, had a number of other topics that were mentioned. Or how do you define what content is in these cases? It's a really broad question, I know.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't specifically answer, I think, your question in relation to that data set, because I didn't look at that data set.
Fair. But if you see a tweet, tweets that look like that, sort of, what are you looking for from a qualitative
so I mean, that would depend all on my research question, right? So my research question might be, what kind of gendered language are these toxic tweets using against Trudeau? Like, are they feminizing Trudeau, right? And then I would look for stuff like that. Or it just might be that I am open coding because we know that these have been determined to be toxic. But as Stu pointed out during Felipe's presentation, we don't know really what measures, like we don't have the transparency there. It's the best we can do. And we know that toxicity is being measured, but maybe we want to go in there and see in a subset of those tweets, okay, well, what really are the trends that are being labeled as toxic in this case? And then in that case, I might go in and use open coding to sort of see what the patterns are. So but it all comes back to, that first research question, and what are we working to determine in these tweets, specifically about the online antisocial behavior we're seeing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was so interesting. So as a person who have working on data and quantitative method for 10 years, I finally see that the attractive aspects and merit of qualitative research these days. And speaking of as a novice in this methodological field, I'm wondering if there's a sort of shared norm in terms of data sharing. So for example, in quantitative research, there is a growing sort of importance that we basically, make our data as transparent as possible. So we kind of, put into the database system, something like that. I was wondering if we, under the assumption that we sort of redact, right, those kind of, identifiable information, are we sort of, like, is there some sort of norm that we actually share those transcription or making it open? So I'm just wondering about that part.
That's a great question, and we're still struggling with this. So basically, what we've come to, at least here at Royal Roads, is we can't make the data set fully open. Like we can't. Again, there's all these ethical concerns right now around, especially in antisocial behavior, what the participants are sharing with you when you're engaging in these long, sometimes intimate type conversations. That said, what we do is we can put the descriptors of the data set online in a repository. So we can say, we interviewed this many people. They were from across Canada. They were between this age, and these are the questions we asked them. And then if other researchers would like access to that data set, the researchers can contact us. And then we can make sure that they are still, protecting the research, that we are meeting all of our ethical concerns, and then we, in that case, could share the data set with the researchers on a case-by-case basis, as long, of course, as we got permission from our participants as part of the consent process. So it's sort of like a mixed model where you put as much metadata as you can up in the open repository, and then researchers reach out to then have access to that data set, and that gives you the extra ability to protect your participants or check in with them if need be, and that sort of thing.
So now I'm keeping people from lunch. It just struck me that this is a lot about analyzing to find out what's there. And as soon as you said arts-based research, I think HCI, human-computer interaction participatory design, which brings people in to work on a solution.
Yes.
So I just struck me that you're just about to tip the corner to that, and participatory action research to actually make a difference. So I think it's very hard for us to go into the now how do we do something about it, and I think you're just, it'd be nice to see connecting your work to that. I mean, to have people who've maybe suffered the trauma see what would have helped, how would they design the system. So that was just more a comment than a question. So.
Yeah, thanks. George Felicianos and I, with a team, are actually working on something similar to that idea right now, where we're hoping to, over the next several years, talk to people about how we can design education programs to improve bystander intervention training. And yeah, we've got one in the pipeline where we're going to ask faculty who have experienced online harassment what they would want their deans to know, so that we can then create training, hopefully for deans and above, to better support their faculty. So yes, I absolutely agree with you, and I like to borrow a lot from actually user experience methods. That's why diary study was in there, at a way of really understanding how people are experiencing these online environments. Awesome. So we did keep you all from lunch, but lunch has been provided by Royal Roads for everybody who is here. And for those of you joining us online, please take your own lunch and join us back here at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you so much. We have a great afternoon planned as well.